Today, 7 historical events that sound completely fake. We start strange. We end with something that almost ended the world. An army armed with machine guns lost a war to birds. Hundreds of people danced through city streets until they dropped dead from exhaustion. A pope dug up a corpse and put it on trial. A city was buried under a wave of molasses. A war began and ended before most people could finish breakfast. The United States lost a hydrogen bomb. And one night, a reflection of sunlight may have brought the world closer to nuclear war than any missile ever did. Every one of those stories is real. And somehow, those aren't even the strangest parts. Because the deeper you go into each one, the less it feels like history, the more it feels like someone made it up. These are 7 real historical events that sound completely fake, and they get harder to believe with every single one. Before we begin, a quick note. This is a new channel, and right now most of the budget goes into researching and producing the stories themselves. I'd love to use some of the higher-end visual tools available today, but those can cost a surprising amount for a single video. So, for now, the visuals may not always look as cinematic as I'd like. My goal is simple. Tell incredible stories first, then steadily improve the production quality as the channel grows. If you enjoy what you're watching, your support genuinely helps make that happen. In 1932, the Australian military deployed soldiers armed with machine guns against a population of flightless birds, and lost. The problem started when roughly 20,000 emus descended on struggling farmland in Western Australia. They tore through crops, smashed fences, consumed grain that already struggling farmers couldn't afford to lose. The country was deep in the Depression. This wasn't a nuisance. It was a crisis. Farmers demanded help. The government sent the army. Major G.P.W. Meredith arrived with Lewis guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition. He was expecting a few days of work, maybe a week. He had machine guns. The enemy had feathers. On paper, this was not a fair fight. It wasn't. Just not in the direction anyone expected. The first engagements were a disaster. Large flocks scattered before soldiers could get into position. The moment the guns opened fire, the birds exploded in every direction at once. Targets disappeared. Every time. Meredith adjusted tactics. The emus adjusted faster. Then the guns started jamming. A Lewis gun failed at exactly the wrong moment during one of the only times they'd managed to get a large group in range. The birds escaped. Again. Cartoons began appearing in newspapers. Journalists were openly mocking the operation. The world was laughing. So, someone had a new idea. Mount the machine gun on a truck. Chase the emus. Shoot while moving. The terrain was rough, the truck bounced violently. The gunner couldn't aim, the emus ran faster than the vehicle could follow. The birds escaped, again and again and again. Eventually the operation was suspended, the emus remained, the army withdrew, and the story entered history as one of the most embarrassing military operations ever recorded. But here's the part that gets overlooked. The emus didn't win because they were clever. Major Meredith wasn't an idiot. The guns were real. The ammunition was real. The problem was something else entirely. Machine guns are extraordinarily effective against concentrated targets. The emus never stayed concentrated. They spread across enormous distances, moving in small groups impossible to pin down. What looked like a military campaign against birds was actually a mismatch between the tools available and the nature of the problem. The birds didn't defeat the army. The landscape did. No enemy commander. No battle plan, no strategy, just 20,000 birds doing exactly what birds do. And somehow, that was enough. One of history's strangest military failures, and it raises a question that gets more uncomfortable the longer you sit with it. If the most powerful military technology of the era couldn't solve a problem like this, what does that say about the limits of force? At least the emus were following instinct. The people in the next story weren't following anything, because nobody could figure out what was driving them at all. The emus ran because that's what emus do. What happened in Strasbourg in 1518 had no explanation like that. Hundreds of people began dancing through the streets. They didn't stop. Some of them couldn't stop. And 500 years later, historians still argue about why. In July of 1518, a woman named Frau Troffea walked out into a street in Strasbourg and began to dance. Nobody thought much of it at first. People danced. Festivals happened. But Frau Troffea didn't stop. Hours passed. She danced. Night came. She danced. The next day, she was still moving. Then another day, then another. Then other people started dancing too, a handful at first, then dozens. Within weeks, hundreds of people had joined the outbreak. Some collapsed from exhaustion and kept going. Contemporary accounts describe people dancing through injuries, through pain, through swollen and bleeding feet. Some reportedly died. The city had never seen anything like it, and nobody, that's not the doctors, not the clergy, not the city officials, could explain it. Authorities hoped it would stop on its own. It didn't. So they brought in doctors. Medical experts of the time concluded that the dancers were suffering from what they called overheated blood, the body forcing itself to move. The cure seemed obvious. Let them keep dancing until it burns itself out. So the city of Strasbourg, watching people collapse in the streets, responded by clearing public spaces, building stages, and hiring musicians. A dancing epidemic. Their solution? Provide better conditions for dancing. The outbreak grew larger, the music played on, the stages stayed open. Fear spread through the city. Religious explanations emerged. Perhaps it was divine punishment, a curse, some supernatural force that had taken hold of the population. In the 16th century, those answers weren't unreasonable. What other explanation was there? More than 500 years later, historians still debate what happened. Poisoning, disease, neurological disorder. But the leading theory today is something called mass psychogenic illness. The idea that extreme collective stress can manifest as physical symptoms that spread between people like a contagion. And Strasbourg in 1518 had stress in abundance. Years of famine, disease, economic collapse, religious uncertainty, relentless fear, an entire population pushed to its breaking point. The dancing may not have been the illness, it may have been the symptom. A society breaking down in public, not because of something invading the human mind, but because of what the human mind does when it reaches its limit. Which means the most frightening possibility isn't that hundreds of people were cursed, it's that nobody was, and that the human mind, under enough pressure, can do this on its own. If that's unsettling, the next story abandoned any pretense of rational behavior entirely, because a few centuries later, one of the most powerful men in Europe faced a political problem, and decided the solution was to put a dead man on trial. The dancers may have been victims of their own minds. The next man was a victim of the man who came after him, even though he was already dead. In the year 897, Pope Stephen VI ordered the body of his predecessor dug out of its grave. The corpse was dressed in full papal robes, seated on a throne, brought into a courtroom and put on trial. The dead man was Pope Formosus. His accuser was Stephen himself. Months after Formosus had died, Stephen had him exhumed and charged with crimes connected to his papacy. Even by the standards of medieval politics, which were not gentle standards, what followed was extraordinary. The decomposing body sat in the courtroom while judges took their seats, charges were read, witnesses were heard, and arguments were presented. And because the defendant was dead, a deacon was appointed to answer questions on his behalf, a living man required to speak for a corpse in a formal legal proceeding. Imagine being that deacon. The verdict was never really in doubt. Formosus was found guilty. His papacy was declared invalid. His official acts were condemned. His decisions were revoked, and then the punishment moved beyond anything the legal record required. The fingers of the corpse were removed, the fingers traditionally used to perform papal blessings. The body was stripped of its robes, dragged through the streets and thrown into the Tiber River. On the surface, a spectacle of madness, but underneath it was something recognizable. Stephen wasn't fighting a dead man. Formosus still had powerful allies, supporters inside the church who owed their positions to his decisions, who endorsed his appointments, who were bound to his legacy. By attacking Formosus, by declaring his entire papacy invalid, Stephen was attacking every one of them. The corpse wasn't the target, the corpse was the instrument. The trial was never about justice, it was about power. And for a brief moment, it worked. Formosus' reputation was damaged, his allies were weakened, Stephen had made his point. Then Rome turned on him. The spectacle that had been designed to demonstrate strength became a symbol of excess and abuse. Outrage spread, support collapsed. The Pope who had put a corpse on trial found himself arrested, imprisoned, and dead in captivity within months. The church authorities that followed reversed most of what he had done. Formosus was rehabilitated, his papacy restored, his decisions revalidated. The man who had won the trial lost everything. The man who had lost the trial won in history. The Cadaver Synod, one of the most surreal episodes ever recorded. A reminder that political power doesn't just drive people toward extraordinary decisions. Sometimes it drives them toward extraordinarily self-destructive ones. Politics made the Cadaver Synod possible. The next disaster had nothing to do with politics, it had to do with physics, and with what happens when 2 million gallons of a very specific substance are released all at once into a city that had no idea what was coming. A corpse on trial, a dancing epidemic, an army routed by birds, and we're only 3 stories in because the next one involves something you've poured on pancakes, and 21 people who didn't survive it. On January the 15th, 1919, a wave taller than a building raced through the streets of Boston. It wasn't water, it wasn't mud, it was molasses, more than 2 million gallons of it, moving at 35 miles per hour, and it killed 21 people. A giant steel storage tank had stood on Boston's waterfront for years, holding industrial molasses destined for manufacturing and alcohol production. Locals knew the tank. Many of them didn't trust it. Residents had reported leaks for years. Children used to collect the drippings from its sides. Workers had raised concerns. The tank groaned. It creaked. It sweated molasses in warm weather. Strange sounds came from inside the structure. It remained in service. On January the 15th, the weather had warmed. A fresh delivery of molasses had been added the previous day. Pressure inside the tank was higher than normal. Just after noon, witnesses heard what sounded like a train or an explosion or something between the two. Then the tank failed. The structure burst apart. A wall of syrup surged through the neighborhood at speeds nobody expected from something that thick. Buildings collapsed, support beams snapped, windows shattered, people were swept off sidewalks, workers were thrown from their posts. The wave was powerful enough to lift a truck, collapse an elevated railway support, and demolish several buildings outright. But the wave wasn't the worst part. Water recedes, molasses doesn't. As the initial surge slowed, it thickened. People who had survived the wave found themselves trapped in something that gripped like concrete as it cooled. Every step required enormous effort. Every passing minute made escape harder. Horses became mired and couldn't be freed. Some sank. Rescue workers wading in to help became trapped themselves. Multiple rescue operations had to be launched simply to reach people already in the process of being rescued. The cleanup took weeks. The smell reportedly lingered for years. The investigation eventually found what most people already suspected. The tank had been structurally inadequate from the start. The design was flawed, the construction was rushed, testing had been insufficient. When the tank was first filled, the company's response to reports of leaks was to paint it brown so the molasses wouldn't show. Warnings dismissed, problems ignored, consequences delayed until they became impossible to avoid. The molasses made the story memorable. Engineering failure made it deadly. And that's why it's still remembered more than a century later. Not because the substance was unusual, because the pattern was familiar. Everything so far has been strange in ways that feel contained, local, human scale. The next 4 stories are different, because from here on we're dealing with governments, militaries, and weapons capable of ending civilizations, and the stories only get harder to believe. Starting with the shortest war ever recorded, which lasted 38 minutes and was over before most people even knew it had started. In August of 1896, a war started and ended in 38 minutes. The Sultan of Zanzibar died. Almost immediately, a succession dispute broke out. A man named Khalid bin Bargash moved quickly. He declared himself the new ruler before anyone else could. Britain had a problem with that. Zanzibar existed under heavy British influence at the time, and British officials had their own preferred candidate for the throne. Khalid's declaration wasn't just inconvenient. It was unacceptable. An ultimatum was issued: step down, leave the palace, relinquish power, or face military action. The deadline was precise, the consequences were explicit. Khalid refused. This is the part of the story that gets skipped over, because by the time the ultimatum expired, the outcome was already obvious. British warships sat offshore, modern, powerful, overwhelming. The military imbalance wasn't a matter of debate. Everyone could see what would happen, and Khalid refused anyway. Whether it was pride, miscalculation, a belief that someone might intervene, or simply the refusal to accept what was in front of him, Khalid had fortified the palace, positioned artillery, and gathered thousands of supporters. From the outside, it looked like a military confrontation. It was not. The deadline expired, the warships opened fire. The bombardment was immediate and devastating. Shells hit the palace, buildings erupted, defensive positions collapsed. One of Zanzibar's few military vessels attempted to return fire. It was sunk within minutes. The palace flag came down, the shooting stopped. 38 minutes, hundreds dead or wounded. A government replaced, a political crisis resolved. The shortest war in recorded history ended before most people in Zanzibar had fully understood it had begun. 38 minutes, hundreds of casualties, a conclusion that was inevitable before the first shot was fired. And compared to what comes next, that almost sounds manageable. Because the next story doesn't involve a palace and a warship. It involves 4 hydrogen bombs, a mid-air collision, and one of them disappearing entirely. The shortest war in history lasted 38 minutes, and the outcome was never in question. The next crisis lasted months, and nobody knew how it would end because nobody knew where the most dangerous object involved actually was. On January the 17th, 1966, a US Air Force B-52 carrying 4 hydrogen bombs was flying above southern Spain. It was a routine Cold War mission. Nuclear-armed aircraft stayed in the air continuously as part of America's deterrent strategy. This kind of flight happened constantly. Nothing about it was unusual. Until the refueling. High above the Spanish coast, the bomber moved into position for an aerial refueling operation. A tanker aircraft approached. The maneuver had been performed hundreds of times before. Then the 2 aircraft collided. The tanker exploded instantly. The bomber broke apart. Fire filled the sky. Debris rained toward the earth. And 4 thermonuclear weapons fell from the clouds. The search began immediately. Military teams flooded into the region. 1 bomb was located quickly, then a second, then a third. 3 of the 4 weapons accounted for, recovered, secured. The 4th had vanished. Nobody knew whether it had landed on land or sea. Nobody knew how far it had traveled. Nobody could guarantee it would ever be found. Thousands of personnel spread across the region, combing fields, searching villages, scanning the countryside from aircraft and ships. Days passed, then weeks, nothing. Meanwhile, 2 of the recovered bombs had hit the ground hard enough for their conventional explosives to detonate. The nuclear weapons themselves had not exploded, but radioactive material had scattered across parts of the Spanish countryside. This was now simultaneously a weapons recovery operation and an environmental emergency. Then a fisherman came forward. He believed he had watched an object fall into the sea. The report was uncertain, but credible enough to shift the entire operation. The search moved underwater. Ships with advanced sonar, submersibles, expanding search grids. Weeks became months, then nearly 900 meters beneath the surface of the Mediterranean, they found it. Recovery cables snapped, equipment failed, weather caused delays. Operations had to be repeated multiple times. At several points, it seemed genuinely possible that the bomb would be lost again, this time permanently, in deeper water. Engineers improvised, military planners watched, the world waited. Eventually, after months, the weapon was recovered. The official position was that the crisis was over. The deeper conclusion was harder to dismiss. These bombs were not lost during a war, not during an attack, not during a crisis. They were lost during a routine refueling, on an ordinary day, during normal operations. If this could happen during routine operations, what might happen during an actual crisis? That question has an answer, because 17 years later, Soviet military systems detected what appeared to be an American nuclear launch, and one man had to decide alone whether civilization was ending. In September 1983, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov was sitting inside a military bunker outside Moscow. It was a routine shift. He was monitoring early warning systems, satellites designed to detect incoming nuclear missiles. His job was straightforward. If the system reported an attack, he reported it up the chain of command. Others would make the final decisions, but everything depended on the accuracy of what he sent them. Shortly after midnight, the alarms activated. Warning lights, computer alerts. The system was reporting an incoming American nuclear missile, then a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth. According to the computers, World War III had begun. Petrov's protocol was clear. Report the attack, pass the information up, let the system respond. But something felt wrong. 5 missiles, only 5. Petrov knew how American nuclear doctrine worked. A genuine first strike would not begin with 5 missiles. If the United States intended to launch, it would launch everything. Hundreds of warheads simultaneously, designed to overwhelm any possible defense. 5 missiles achieved nothing except alerting the target. The computers were certain. The alarms were real. The warning system showed high confidence, and everything in the protocol told him to report it. He classified it as a malfunction, and then he waited. If the warning was genuine, missiles were already traveling toward the Soviet Union. They would arrive within minutes. If he was wrong, hundreds of millions of people could die because he had hesitated. If the warning was false and he had reported it as real, Soviet leadership might authorize a retaliatory strike against the United States. And if that happened, the Americans would respond. And then it would be real. He waited. Minutes passed. No detonations, no impact reports, no secondary confirmation from radar, no evidence of anything. The attack never came. Investigators later found the cause. A rare alignment had allowed sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds to be interpreted by the satellites as nuclear missiles rising from American territory. The system had seen a reflection of the sun and read it as the beginning of nuclear war. The computers believed they were seeing missiles. They were seeing the sun. Petrov was not celebrated. He was reprimanded. He had deviated from protocol, and the Soviet military did not distinguish between a deviation that saved civilization and any other deviation. He was quietly moved to a less sensitive posting. For years, the incident was classified. He eventually retired to a small apartment outside Moscow. He said later that he didn't consider himself a hero. He said he was simply doing his job, except he wasn't. He was overriding a system that said one thing, with a judgment that said something different, under pressure that most people will never experience, with consequences he couldn't fully know. The technology believed it. The procedures believed it. The alarms believed it. One man didn't. History tends to remember battles, leaders, movements, turning points marked by dramatic action. But sometimes history turns on a single judgment call made in a quiet room, in the middle of the night, by someone whose name most people have never heard. For a few minutes in September 1983, the fate of civilization may have rested on one exhausted officer trusting his instincts over a machine. That possibility is harder to forget than any missile. None of these stories were supposed to happen. That's what makes them unforgettable. History isn't strange because rare events occur. History is strange because impossible events keep occurring in a world run by ordinary people making ordinary decisions, until the moment they become extraordinary. Somewhere in the archives, there are more stories like these. Events that should never have happened. Moments when reality became stranger than anything someone could have invented. We haven't found all of them yet. And if 7 stories like these are real, imagine how many more are still waiting. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. Every episode goes this deep, and the next one is already harder to believe than this one.